Hey, welcome to Full Crazy Town, episode 6. Wearing another t-shirt from the United Arab Emirates, one of my the traditional coffee container is called the Dala, and it's real popular on the Arabian Peninsula, where my wife and I worked for several years as international teachers. So today we're going to pick it up where we left off last time with we're about halfway through. Yeah. Go to fullcrazytown.com and see how to buy my book and how to listen to past podcasts as well as a new one each week. But we were talking about kind of identity politics, and that's like the real uh, just a push button phrase. Boy, you mentioned identity politics or wokeism or boy, people just want to flare. But what I get into here pretty soon, I don't think I've talked about it yet, is the pyramid of power. Norm Finkelstein calls it the oppression sweepstakes. That is, the group that can present themselves as the most oppressed has the most power. They're the eternal victims, kind of the way the Jewish people are portraying themselves these days over in Western Asia. So I'll just jump into it. Chapter 7 is titled Freak Out What to Do. Get to the top of the pyramid of power, quick, or else. Some LGBTQIA people think that they are so oppressed that it's okay to oppress, hate, and attack anyone who doesn't openly support them. And they've said it, the trans rights activists say, you must face and embrace us. You must. Stochastic terrorism. Now, this is one you might want to look up just so you're sure of what it means. Stochastic terrorism is the public demonization of a person or group resulting in the incitement of a violent act, which is statistically probable, but whose specifics cannot be predicted. So you might be a terrorist if you disagree with me. There's no need for hate crime laws. We already have laws against violence. Besides, if you have a hate crime law, somebody has to decide the definition of hate crimes, hate speech. If we allow others to define what is and what isn't hate speech, we're giving up our First Amendment rights. Trans activist Chase Strangio has repeatedly used the phrase, "That's a hill I will die on," when it comes to confrontations, criticisms, and questions, which he views as direct attacks. And no wonder there is pushback when it comes to gender affirming care like puberty blockers, cross sex hormones, surgical procedures such as breast, penis, and testes amputations, hysterectomies for teens and preteens. No research exists proving these medications or procedures are helpful to young people. It's sort of the COVID vaccine, untested, experimental, uh, bio effects on the public at large. Puberty blockers were developed to treat precocious puberty. These untested drugs have been associated with thinning and brittle bones, teeth that shed enamel, degenerative spinal discs, painful joints, radical mood swings, seizures, migraines, suicidal thoughts, fibromyalgia, and fertility problems. There is a World Professional Association for Transgender Health Standards of Cares for Gender Dysphoria, a document that's also not based on clinical research and is being challenged in a court of law for its very basis. A large team of lawyers is fighting on behalf of WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, to not have to answer this in courts. Females who get hysterectomies prior to menopause, as some trans women do, have an increased risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke. Further studies show that 80% of those who transition to another gender as teenagers transition back when they're in their 20s. It's for these reasons that trans rights activists don't want to discuss anything about their movement and why they promote violence to discourage questions and criticisms. One trans rights activist was recently arrested for encouraging people to punch a TERF, TERF being a trans exclusionary radical feminist. In other words, someone who refuses to face and embrace the trans movement. These activists want to be considered on the same level as feminists, but many feminists do not want them hopping on their bandwagon. Then the TRAs incite violence against the TERFs, which generates headlines and more attention, and by the by, more donations. The American College of Pediatricians issued a report stating that there have been over 60 studies of gender dysphoria that show gender affirming therapy doesn't work. No matter, Planned Parenthood hired 60,000 counselors to go into schools and recruit students for treatment, a form of eugenics. I talked to one of these counselors. They're making like 3 times the salary that a school teacher would make. So a lot of teachers are like bagging it, getting out of teaching, wanting to be one of these 60,000. Used to be, if a parent thought their child was different, they'd take him or her to a therapist. Now the student can decide on their own to undergo hormone blockers and or surgeries. Used to be, self-esteem and self-worth were seen as good strategies for accepting yourself the way you are. Now, school counselors encourage students to change their gender as soon as they feel unsure about themselves. It's these linguistic fights that dominate every narrative, while important issues are ignored. And the main goal of these battles is to make the others be quiet and behave. So, doesn't this provide motivation for some people to join the ranks of the oppressed individuals so they can control and influence others? There is evidence that adolescents are especially susceptible to wanting to change their sexual orientations, identities, due to peer pressures, mental anxieties, social norms, and or just to confound their parents. Basically, if you're a straight white male, you're not oppressed. You are the oppressor. Full stop. Therefore, you have no say in the LGBTQIA++ debates, no opinion worth listening to. You can't say that abortion rights and trans rights are not the same thing. Dudes can't say anything, and if they do, the canceling police will pick apart their words, quote them out of context, and flame them beyond belief, possibly costing jobs and ruining reputations. Going from there, let's look at the oppressed and the power they gain from being labeled as such. Granted, some of these people have been threatened and killed. Women and blacks have been oppressed for thousands of years, so I put them at the top of the most oppressed minority category. There is a fighting advantage to being the underdog. The most oppressed get to criticize, condemn, cancel, censor anyone they want to, thus perhaps gaining immense power and influence. So, from top to bottom, starting with the most oppressed, for the longest time, here's my take on where the minorities rate in terms of their ability to fight back against the man. I call it the pyramid of power. The professor, reporter, activist, commentator Norman Finkelstein calls it the oppression sweepstakes because job applicants have used their identities to qualify for affirmative action jobs. It's strange that women are called a minority since they're 51% of the world's population, but I understand that they have been treated like the weaker sex for tens of thousands of years. For this reason, women need to be seen as the most potentially powerful class of advocates for their cause. The women's lib movement began after the civil rights movement, but women hold the top spot on the pyramid of power. However, blacks are not next in line. Hey, what? Not nor the women of color. That distinction goes to the alphabet soup collection LGBTQIA. This diverse group is hard to categorize, but Dave Chappelle does a hilarious job of it. Just check it out on YouTube. It's hilarious if you're not thin skinned. Getting to the top of their mini pyramid takes guile, determination. Now, this is the mini pyramid, is like the L and the G and the B and the T and the Q and the 7 or 8 categories all fighting each other to get to the top of their pyramid, to get to the top of the pyramid of power. So getting to the top of their mini pyramid takes guile, determination, and more than a tad of questionable conduct. For years, there were just lesbians and gays and bisexuals hanging out with them. Lesbians trumped gays because gays are men, therefore toxic. These groups enjoy special rights as a way of making up for decades of discrimination. You can't question them without being accused of bias, bigotry, hateful rhetoric, hate speech, and all that. I think it's for this reason that transgendered people want to be associated with the women's movement. No questions asked. I believe they think if we can just piggyback our way to the top of the pyramid of power, that'd be great. Another point about the pyramid: blacks are there because of the color of their skin. Women are there due to their gender, but the LGBTQIA people are there because they decided to identify with a particular sexual orientation. These decisions were probably forced upon them by the nature-nurture dynamic, but nevertheless, they were decisions. It seems to me that blacks should be considered the most oppressed group due to their enslavement, not just in this country, but worldwide for thousands of years. But I want to repeat that. It seems to me that blacks should be considered the most oppressed group due to their enslavement, Reconstruction, and Jim Crow laws. Women rank at the top due to their numbers and their suffering as members of the weaker sex. The fact that the trans rights activists have vaulted onto the pyramid near the top is a testament to their success at being considered a protected minority based on their sexual orientation, on par with Black people and women. Blacks and immigrants must compete for resources in cities, and the media do all they can to increase the tensions between the two groups. Blacks get redlined into the worst parts of the cities. Their communities suffer the most from neglected infrastructure, pollution, food deserts, lack of job opportunities, poverty, lack of investments, bad air, soil, water, bad press. Yet many in these areas fall victim to the government's plan to push the culture wars in order to divert attention away from economic issues. The media constantly report on black violence, rap, thug music, R. Kelly and Diddy. And they never allow the mere mention of terms like police state redlining or the inner city neglect. Many corporations are eager to beef up their diversity, equity, inclusion slash environmental social governance profiles. And when they hire like-minded minorities, especially for middle management positions, their companies look good on paper and their ESG scores improve. Blacks are often passed over for promotions into middle management positions, increasing the resentment they feel for the DEI ESG groups. Emotional issues are pushed instead of more substantive ones. Take Biden's open border policy that lefty libs seem to love. The border is open, so more detainees will fill detention camps like for profit prisons. And they'll help farmers, factories, sweatshops, and service industries profit from their labor, whether they're undocumented or not. Or they'll add to the unemployed population. Sometimes housing, cash, healthcare are provided for these people, but not the average low income wage earners or American vets or unhoused people with addiction and or mental illness issues. Kids are still in cages, but AOC doesn't share tears for them now. Now she and others can be seen crying over the January 6th riots and terrified Jewish students. The US sanctions create intolerable conditions in many parts of Central and South America. Sanctions don't hurt governments, they harm civilians. Sanctions create the conditions that encourage gangs to take over neighborhoods, and the gangs make boys and young men join them or be killed. Family businesses must pay protection money, and this forces desperate families north seeking better lives against all odds. The corporate media uses fear to pit blacks against Hispanics, whereas it's the rigged economy that's causing almost all their misery. The Revolutionary Blackout Network does a great job of reporting the news and delivering spot on asides and quips. Nick Cruz compares the black situation to a prisoner without enough to eat. Then another prisoner gets placed in his cell, so now they must fight each other for the same amount of food. City leaders tell black activists when they demand the city invest in their neighborhoods, "We can't help you. It's all going to those immigrants." Or some other lame excuse like, "Now is not the right time." One major city told veterans in a retirement center they had to move out because the city had to house all the immigrants that the Republican governors were shipping north. Immigration issue is weaponized by all politicians to mobilize their voters. Millions of desperate economic refugees flood across our southern border, adding to the chaos that low or no income people have to endure. This adds to the unhoused populations who must somehow survive in cities with crumbling infrastructures. October 7th vaulted Jewish people to the top of the pyramid. Whoa, that was quick, pretty easy too. The right wing flipped from being all about free speech and against censorship, like they were when they didn't like Alex Jones and Trump getting kicked off Twitter X. They flipped from being all about free speech to suddenly insisting that pro-Palestinian speech is anti-Semitic. They used to mock people who said they were oppressed and needed safe spaces as being woke snowflakes. But after 10/7, they did an about face forward march, suddenly demanded college presidents be fired, students punished, and Jewish people be given special rights and special protection. Never mind the Gazans. Chapter 8. This is where I really got. I had people edit this manuscript before I sent in, and once they read chapter 8, they said, "You're going to make a lot of enemies." Anyway, this is what just me venting, and mainly what I listen to, other people who talk about these issues, other podcasters, a dozen, 2 dozen of them, they all agree. I'm just, you know, paraphrasing here. Trans rights activists and the oppression sweepstakes. So I go into it more based on what I said at second half of chapter 7. But some of the TRAs seem to have control problems. That is, they want to control others without having to make any personal sacrifices themselves. A transsexual woman, Debbie Hayton, says sex is about biology, gender is about psychology. She says our sex relates to our role or expected role in the reproduction of our species. Gender is a more abstract term that relates to aspects of our physiology, how we express our personality in the context of gender roles within society. Everyone has a sex, either male or female. We can't change it any more than we can change the color of our eyes. No one is outside the two sex categories, so no one is non binary. A person's gender is less clear cut. Roles and expected characteristics vary hugely. Who gets to wear makeup and who gets to pull on trousers are worked out in a constantly shifting social context. Differences exist within the two sex classes, not between them. Transgender rights activists have been criticized for not doing the research necessary to validate their claims. For instance, they claim trans women athletes have every right to compete at all levels without acknowledging differences in men's and women's body sizes and lean body mass. A recent study revealed that hormone suppression doesn't work. Men typically have 40 to 45% more lean body mass than women, and testosterone suppression reduces lean body mass by about 4 to 5%. Men typically have 30 to 60% higher muscle strength than women, and testosterone suppressants reduce muscle strength by about 9%. An event in Eugene, Oregon made international headlines. A drag queen was going to read stories to children in a local pub, but protesters held up signs that read, "Stop sexualizing our children." I wrote a letter to the editor of the local left-leaning paper asking if it was a good idea to have drag queen shows like cabaret or burlesque shows, as far as I was concerned, for kids in a bar. This earned me a rebuke from the editor and the trans rights activists who had screamed obscenities at the protesters. Other cities have had sadomasochistic demonstrations for kids, babies, and their mothers. It seems like the crazier the idea, the better. What devious mindset is behind this push? My paranoid brain leads toward make child abuse normal theory. As Matt Taibbi poured through the Twitter files, he found a lot of Congress people and celebrities with some, as he said it, pretty weird sex habits that he didn't feel like commenting on. Now that the nasty details of Epstein's sex trap island are coming out, plus Diddy and Hollywood stuff, the so called elites may see the need to take the edge off their crimes. They may be using trans rights activists to say it's okay to introduce children to the world of sex, like it's their right to know. 30,000 counselors have been placed in schools across the US with instructions to encourage students to feel different, to undergo untested hormonal treatments and surgeries. Even the World Health Organization's Director General, Tedros, says that children have the right to freedom of sex. Now, Tedros is the former warlord in Ethiopia. He's head of the WHO now, but he's a warlord and he's a weirdo. He's a former warlord from Ethiopia who's partly responsible for starving the residents in the Tigray region. You might remember that. And his WHO is aggressively pressing for more regulatory powers to deal with the next pandemic. Juliet Engel has written a book, Surviving MK Ultra. That's another one you want to try to Google and then go about 500 entries into it before you'll get the real story from Google or anybody else. But yeah, MK Ultra. Juliet Engel, in fact, you could buy her book, Engel. She wrote the book Surviving MK Ultra that relates her experience as she, at age 6, was sold by her father in 1955 to a CIA agent involved in a super secret child sex trafficking agency called MK Ultra. I'm not making this up. Underage sex cults were operated out of tunnels under Disneyland. Can you imagine that? Mickey Mouse. And Juliet grew up in a network of mind control, sex abuse, and soul stealing black masses. It's like after a while, we're just a couple days ahead of Thanksgiving here. You don't want to know anymore. It's too scary. Scary and not fun. And something else is just in the news I wanted to mention. Well, I'm reading the book Chaos about the Manson murders, and there was COINTELPRO was the FBI counterinsurgency program in the 60s. And so they went from infiltrating Students for a Democratic Society, Tom Hayden, Jane Fonda, all that, to just trying to well, they did. They infiltrated the Manson family, kind of like helped encourage brain dead, drugged out zombie girls to do anything that they were programmed to do. And then the book Helter Skelter was written by the prosecuting attorney, the greatest crime novel drama ever. And it's a great read. The book is by Tom O'Malley called Chaos, and it's all about, that leads into Hollywood and, the Diddy, R. Kelly things and stuff that's just ballooning out of control. And what they said about Helter Skelter was that it was supposed to cause a race riot. They expected the Manson family to rise up and attack the Black Panthers. So any murders like Fred Hampton would get blamed on the Manson family, of course. Anyway, Juliet Engel, boy, oh boy, soul-stealing black masses. Whew. She escaped at age 17 and forgot about her past. She investigated the trafficking of children in the Soviet Union for sex cults and the trafficking of organs to be sent to the US, Germany, and Israel. Ugh. 2001, she tried to alert world authorities to these practices without success. So she built an underground railroad for victims, maintaining that dark forces have unleashed pedophiles and ritualized abuse upon our children. Her website, OurCountryOurChildren.com, details her efforts to rescue some of the 2 million children who go missing annually in the United States. Comedian Cat Williams, quite the dude, suspects other forces are at work here. He's a firm believer in the Illuminati because he was asked to join them. He freely discusses secret societies, past and present. He says the Knights Templar, beginning in about 1307, began worshiping Baphomet, a deity associated with homosexual relations and sodomy. He describes a ritual known as Baphomet the Transgender, kissing the ass ring. Again, don't ask questions. Do your own research. You want to hear any more. By 1856, their worshiping became associated with sabbatic goat. With the sabbatic goat, composed of binary elements representing the symbolism of the equilibrium of opposites like good and evil, male and female, human and animal. Baphomet represented the goal of perfect social order. Perfect according to the Knights Templar, that is. This is so wild. Bill Lee of Tennessee signed a bill into law that bans adult entertainment that's harmful to minors. Other governors have restricted surgeries and hormone blocking drugs for minors. The woke left presents this as being anti LGBTQ. That's because minorities must always present themselves as victims, righteously fighting back against their oppressors. This cult of victimization is powerful, as any oppressed minority will attest. Anyone who dares to not honor victims is portrayed as if he is a perpetrator. Certain oppressed minorities must constantly attack all critics and questioners and constantly push the limit on what the public will accept. The wackier the cause, the better, because if they ever win, then they lose their talking points and their underdog advantage. This is what happened when Obama legalized same sex marriages. This put gays and lesbians at risk of being pushed aside by the next most oppressed would be pyramid topper. The TRAs and others won't be there for a while, so I suspect that they'll want to keep front burner, stay relevant, generate headlines, and encourage donations. U.S. is adhering to the January 2018 ruling by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which held that the same-sex marriage and the recognition of one's gender identity on official documents are human rights protected by the American Convention on Human Rights. LGBTQ rights around the world are in the news, vigorously promoted, no matter what the local population's religious beliefs are or what they think, feel, or care about. The U.S. is imposing sanctions on Uganda for passing an anti-gay law. Did you hear that? The U.S. is imposing sanctions on Uganda for passing an anti-gay law. If I lived there, I wouldn't be in favor of this law, but I live in this country which goes to bat for the LGBTQ plus communities around the world. I think we should mind our own business and take care of our citizens' basic needs first. I think it's wrong that anyone can change their gender identity at any time, and everyone around them must not only accept and embrace them right away, but also must be prepared for shaming and personal attacks if they don't immediately honor the change or if they dare to question or criticize. It gets worse. A lot of my info comes from Glenn Greenwald, and he reports that a group of journalists and trans activists have written a letter to the New York Times demanding the debate about hormonal treatments and surgeries for teens stop. No more discussions. He goes on. I absolutely question why someone can simply declare a new gender identity that must be instantly respected based solely upon self-declaration. But the same can't be done when it comes to racial identity. He resents the idea that if you're going to introduce widespread radical changes into society about how gender is conceived, and you're going to directly implicate and involve young children in that, then it's declared somehow immoral or dangerous for people who have good faith questions about all this to air those doubts. The trans community has perfected the art of victimhood, and they're using this fine art to reconstruct what we think is a boy and a girl. They're behind the movement that lets students confide in schools instead of their parents when it comes to changing their gender. Students are allowed to have a secret second life away from home. As a teacher, I know that we were in loco parentis, in quotes. In loco parentis means in place of parents when the kids were at school. We're in charge, we're responsible for them. But helping kids transition to a different gender without parental consent or knowledge is, to me, outrageous. If the student fears harm from the parent, that's one thing. But if the person just doesn't like the parents or wants to make them mad or upset or play a joke on them or just do their own thing, that's another. Many counselors report that kids gain points with their friends if they go on and on about their levels of victimhood. If a student wanted to change their gender and was unsure how the parent would take it, the school counselor could advise her or him about ascertaining their parents' beliefs and opinions. Unless the school is sure of trouble, the parents need to be involved, not loco parentis, the parentis. The parents need to be involved, and then, if danger is anticipated, child services should be contacted. Remember, child service. There's one in every state. They're there to handle these situations. The parents need to be involved, unless they're weirdos, and everybody knows that. It seems like trans people don't want to win arguments. They gain their power by constantly provoking anger and more criticism. They don't want to debate because they would have to advocate for themselves instead of browbeating everyone into automatically accepting them and their opinions. Like so many of their other promotions, like pressing for LGBTQ rights in Guatemala and other conservative countries like Pakistan, we need to debate, discuss, if necessary, agree to disagree, but not attack each other. I mean, agreeing to disagreeing should be as far as we go, as far as shaking our tiny fist and trying to do something, but not attack each other. That's playing the oligarch's game. Many of us chase the impossible dream, perhaps never really wanting it, only wanting to pursue it and to argue about getting it. The more emotions that can be roused, the better, and the nuttier the cause, the better for the emote-o-meter and the donation box. Back to the pyramid. After people of color come other groups, religious and like-minded sects, immigrants, the poor, the disabled, the unemployed, the unhoused, the forgotten, and or the ignored. Hardly anyone notices them unless they're being used in statistical analysis or weaponized for political gain. It's said that the total wealth of the bottom half of all Americans is equal to the half dozen wealthiest men in America. That's, 6 dudes versus 100 million people, something like that. Oh, boy. And the world's 7 richest men have as much wealth as all the women in Africa. It's not these white men who are on the bottom rung of the ladder, the foundation of the pyramid. That honor goes to the average straight white male who probably does have a fair bit of white privilege built into him. I know I did and still do. I'm a white guy, and many people treat me. Wait a minute. Hang on. I skipped a line. Let's see. That honor goes to the average straight white male who probably does have a fair bit of white privilege built into him. I know I did and still do, not because of my attitude or sense of entitlement, but because I am a white guy and many people treat me differently than they do persons of color and women. However, I'm trying to use my privilege to encourage equality instead of the top-down system that favors special rights over equal rights. Equality for men would mean recognition of their increasing rates of depression and suicide. Despair is setting into white males. There's so much talk about the incels, right? The involuntary celibate, 30 years old, living in their parents' basement, going crazier and crazier by the day, too stupid to get laid, or stuff like that. Anyway, despair is setting into the white males 18 to 24 because of the lack of opportunities and the media's disparagement of men in general. As class issues are ignored and cultural stories dominate the media, white men are cast as the oppressors against those who are oppressed. It's for these reasons and more that white men 18 to 24 are flocking to the likes of Andrew Tate, the Republican Party, Trump, and Jackson Hinkle, podcaster, and his brand of MAGA communism. BlackRock and Vanguard, net worth 55 trillion, contribute liberally to the LGBTQIA plus community, and the factions must fight each other for greater shares of their proceeds. See how that means? Remember I said 8 categories, all duking it out for donations. This does not encourage equality. It sets up a competitive system of PR campaigns, bickering, endless debates, sensationalist headlines, constant pandering for influence, donations, and support. Private equity firms oversee most of the big ticket items like healthcare, real estate, and insurance. They use their trillions to buy politicians, media figures, celebrities, influencers, and the leaders of the human rights and environmental movements. They bring in members of oppressed minorities to serve on boards of directors and in middle management position. This way, they pump up their images with greenwashing and high DEI ESG scores. And all narratives center around side issues like bathrooms and locker rooms. A dozen years ago, hedge fund organizations and other investment groups saw people coming together around the Occupy movement and the Tea Party. And they decided they need new wedge issues. The Pentagon trotted out a string of spokeswomen, starting with Lieutenant Colonel Bree Fram, not her real name, I'm guessing, who said, all too often, I hear people talking about dignity and respect as goals, but that's not good enough. Dignity and respect are the bare minimum. We need to focus on intentional inclusivity. What's that? There are far too many people out there, not just LGBTQ individuals, who feel marginalized, shut out, or discriminated against. We need to set out our symbols of pride, share your pronouns in emails, particularly if you're someone who doesn't think you need to. Initiate difficult conversations about racial and gender barriers, and share your vulnerability in a way that draws others in. You all have the power to promote intentional inclusivity to ensure that multiple perspectives get heard. I don't know if I need to repeat that. I didn't read that quite the way it should have been read, but I don't know. Buy my book, and if you want to make your own decision. Inclusion is a national security imperative. We fight today and in the future using brain power, and if that brain that we use to fight in space and in the cyber world just so happens to be in a trans body, you should want them all serving alongside me. Now something is weird here. Oh, I see. This was all big one big long quote by Colonel Bree Fram. So the fact that intentional inclusivity is a convoluted concept. That's the lieutenant or the colonel, Lieutenant Colonel Bree Fram's quote that is weird. It's confusing. Stop confusing me. The military is having, now this is end of the quotes. This is the military is having problems with recruitment. That's why they're reaching out to diverse and vulnerable groups like immigrants and the poor. Some generals are pushing back against actively recruiting trans people. One said that he'd lost men and women in combat, and it wasn't due to using the wrong pronoun. He said, "You fight for the person next to you in the foxhole, not for a flag or a piece of paper." The article from the news site Motherboard, titled Bombs and Tasers, reported that Raytheon had partnered with the LGBTQ community to promote their partnership via gestures like changing their corporate logo to rainbow colors. The Human Rights Commission named Raytheon as one of the best places to work, given their inclusive image. Axon, a $9 billion company that makes tasers and drones, rebranded itself to Protect Love, in quotes, Protect Love, and to engage in a charade of standing with marginalized groups while profiting from the marginalization. NBC News reported a bipartisan bill that included a ban on the pride flag flying over U.S. embassies. The American Petro Institute has a new rainbow colored logo celebrating the LGBTQ plus community. Matt Taibbi took issue with trans writer Andrea Long Chu's article, A Moral Case for Letting Trans Kids Change Their Bodies. He gives a great vocabulary describing her work as a Jeremiad, I'd look it up, Jeremiad, a long, mournful complaint, a Jeremiad in support of the idea that children must have absolute political agency. Her money passage, we must be prepared to defend the idea that, in principle, everyone should have access to sex changing medical care, regardless of age, gender, identity, social, environment, or psychiatric history. Leaked WPATH files were published in the March 4th edition of Environmental Progress. They showed widespread medical misconduct, including genital mutilations and pressures to acquiesce to untested drugs and surgeries. The New York Times and the American Medical Association have relied for years on WPATH reports, but neither organization has responded to the leaked files despite evidence that gender medicine is the largest medical mistreatment scandal in history. Bigger than Joseph Mengele's in World War II, during World War II. While WPATH files fully expose the conspiracy to mistreat children, adolescents, and vulnerable adults, there had long been evidence that something was deeply wrong with gender affirming care. In 2022, just hours after WPATH released its Standards of Care 8, the organization removed all age limits. Some wondered why the suggested minimum ages for cross-sex hormones, double mastectomies, breast implants, facial feminization surgeries, hysterectomies, frontal orbital remodeling, phalloplasties, don't ask, vaginoplasties, met, metoidioplasties, and man, this is thick, orchi, erectomies were all removed just a few hours after the standards were published. A therapist named James Esses, who was fired from the master's program for blowing the whistle on gender pseudoscience, tweeted, "The fact that an 8-year-old could potentially be prescribed puberty blockers is terrifying. It's one of the most shocking indictments of ideology infecting medicine that I've ever seen." WPATH President Mark Bowers claimed that WPATH standards of care are science based and that puberty blockers are safe and effective. Safe and where have I heard that before? Oh, yeah, COVID. Um, She's safe and effective despite evidence that points to loss of fertility. She was constantly posing the choice that parents face. Would you rather have a trans kid or a dead kid? What kind of a person are you? Referring to the supposed threats that all trans kids are subjected to. Matt finishes his comments about the article with, "A lot of this piece is standard issue, woe is me, fuck everything cartoon nihilism that you'd hear from any laptop class liberal arts product, arguing for a generalized smashing of the patriarchy, among other things, by attacking the biological conspiracy to produce those units of material labor known as babies." Um, Both Matt and Glenn Greenwald have a great vocabulary, and a lot of times I have to go back and read what they said twice, and half the time they send me into the dictionary. Spring 23, trans rights activists attack women's rights speech. A women's rights event became violent recently, well, spring 23, in New Zealand. The main speaker and event organizer, Posey Parker, had to be escorted out by police, who were also attacked, and left the country not long after. She's British, and now people are calling for the governments of New Zealand and UK to condemn this. Posey Parker's real name is Kelly J. Keane. She's one of the most vocal critics of gender ideology and for insisting that a woman is an adult human female. Get that? She insists a woman is an adult human female. Okay. She's public enemy number one for TRAs, or maybe number two behind J.K. Rowling, who said the same thing. The violent mob proved Parker's point. Women should have protected spaces away from violent people who want them to share their ideology. Does this mean trans people are violent? Of course not, but it absolutely shows that women should have protected spaces. Should have protected spaces. Remember? Hashtag Me Too, protected spaces. That same weekend, a lesbian group in the UK was met with protests at their event too. The media said this was a joyful protest because they can't admit that these two groups have opposing ideologies. Lesbians did not find this event joyful. They were afraid for their safety. Lesbians must be allowed to be themselves without having to accept people who are not like them into their communities. So Posey Parker says. Just before Transgender Day 23 and their day of vengeance, ads showed an activist pointing guns at imaginary critics. That same weekend saw a transgendered woman shoot and kill 6 people, 3 of whom were 9-year-old kids in Memphis, Tennessee. This person had a manifesto, but it was not published, unlike past manifestos, although insiders say This person hated white Christians. As of spring 24, some countries and states are pushing back against special considerations being given to trans people and TRAs. England's NHS banned gender affirming care. Alabama banned diversity programs, and Florida passed the Stop Woke Act. Gradually, TRAs are being booted off the top of the pyramid. What a great place to stop. Like I said, chapter 8's thick. Chapter 7 just barely got into this, but I'm about to get into COINTELPRO. So just so that doesn't generate more censorship on this episode, I'm going to bag it for now. Thanks for watching. I hope you all see. I don't know if you can see my my One Love t-shirt up here. I like that. It's from my reggae Rasta collection. And over here's my Fire Sign Theater t-shirt that shows Groucho Marx and John Lennon, and the caption is "All Hail Marx Lenin." How can you be in two places at once when you're not anywhere at all? Anyway, keep that in mind. Till next week. Do go to fullcrazytown.com to read more about my book, how to get it, basic blurbs, just more about basically the main thing is the solutions to this mess. Mine's called Reconnect Over Coffee, where we get together with those from whom we've become estranged ever since the gates. Russiagate, Insurrection Gate, COVID Gate, Laptop Gate, Proxy War Gate, and now Genocide Gate. I might mention too, I like to mention that when the October 23 broke out, I knew it was time to publish. That this Nick Cruz from RBN says it's go time. This is going to polarize everybody. You're either for genocide or you're against it. There's no, well, I don't like women and children, but I like Harris. She's much better than Trump because I have the Trump derangement syndrome. So it's going to get, you think it's thick now, MK Ultra and stuff, COINTEL and the Manson murders and the CIA plant inside the family of Manson and everything they did to encourage these drug-crazed hippies to kill people that blah, 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 blah. Tune in to episode 6. No, this is 6. Tune in to 7 for more of this stuff. Bye now. Have a good week.